Greetings and happy Thanksgiving to all. This is Jeff, the host of Nindie Nation, and today we're going to be doing something a little different. Usually, Nindie Nation is a weekly podcast and YouTube show dedicated to everything independently developed for the Nintendo Switch. This week, however, there are over 1,440 games currently at their lowest discounted prices ever on the eShop. So we're going to take our usual Friday slot, and instead of a quick dose of 3 or 4 games on sale, we are going to run through all of the best indies that are available at some of their lowest prices ever. Now, if Nindie Nation is part of your weekly rotation, you're probably used to a really polished and scripted show, and that's not going to be the case this week, because there are 96 games that we're going to talk about, so I'm going to do my best to give a brief rundown of each one, kind of off the cuff. So if I missed your favorite game, or there's something else that you think should be on this list, go hit the comments and let us know. And if this is your first time joining Nindie Nation, we hope that you come back in the future for our weekly shows on Tuesday, Friday, and weekly Thursday night streams. Now there's a lot of games here, as I discussed, so we broke them up into different categories, with most of them being about 10 to 12 titles each. And to kick things off, we're going to start out with action games. Now when I say action games, I mean that they do have a beginning and end. They're not strictly just score chasing, but these games are mostly about progression and about button mashing and about dexterity and that kind of stuff. So let's get going. The action games category has 15 games, most of them at their lowest ever prices, and we kick things off with Ape-Out, which is 50% off for $7.49. This is a top-down, balls-to-the-wall action game about an ape who escapes from a science facility, and your goal is to just cause as much destruction as possible as you work your way to the exit. It is a fantastic title and is also known for its incredibly innovative soundtrack that really feels like a jazz drummer is just sitting beside you, building a soundtrack to the action that you're making happen on screen. Katana Zero is 40% off for $8.99, and this is a side-scrolling, stealth-based kind of one-hit kill ninja game. It also has this really cool meta story where in between levels you're dealing with the ramifications of your actions and the mental impact that it's taking on the ninja. It's a really cool game and one of the highest rated titles on today's list. Mighty Gunvolt Burst is one of my favorite games on the Switch and is 60% off for $3.99. If you're a fan of Mega Man games, this is for you, and the team at Inti Creates has done such a good job at supporting this game after release that you're not going to run out of anything to do anytime soon. You're going to get classic Mega Man-style action, but with multiple different playable characters, and a bunch of loot/grinding/customization that you can add to your characters to really almost break the Mega Man formula in a really fun way. My Friend Pedro is 50% off for $9.99 and is basically what would happen if they made a side-scrolling action game around the Matrix, and it was awesome. It's all about acrobatic gunplay, running and jumping and landing on skateboards while shooting lights and explosive barrels and taking out 10 guys in a room, and doing it all while backflipping in slow motion. And it's, I guess it's more John Wick the game than it is the Matrix. Either way, it's kind of like Keanu Reeves in an action game on your Switch. Mark of the Ninja Remastered is another stealth-based, side-scrolling ninja game. This one is 75% off for $4.99, and is a game that came out during the glory days of Xbox Live Arcade. The new remaster is beautiful, the gameplay is still just as incredible as it always was, and it comes highly recommended as long as you're a fan of stealth action. Blaster Master Zero 1 and 2 are both 50% off for $4.99, and they both call back to the original NES and Genesis titles where you're spending about a third of your time in a side-scrolling platforming stage, another third of your time in a side-scrolling platforming stage as a little ATV-like vehicle, and then the other third of your time in a top-down twin-stick shooter style gameplay. Both of the games are fantastic, although I like the shorter length and more succinct nature of the first more than the second. But if you like the first one and you haven't played the second one, 50% off at $4.99 is its lowest price ever. Similar to Blaster Master Zero, we've got Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 1 and 2. The first one is 50% off for $4.99, and the second one is only 35% off for $9.74. If you're unaware, both of these are inspired by the original NES Castlevania games, to the point that they both almost look identical to Castlevania 3. You switch between characters, you have more slow, methodical, side-scrolling action, and they both include pixel art that stands out among the best of what the original NES had to offer. Moving on to something completely different, Assault Android Cactus is 60% off for $7.99, and this one is a twin-stick shooter that doesn't really have any of the pomp and circumstance regarding upgrades or RPG mechanics. No, this is just straight-up, high-quality twin-stick shooting action. You've got a couple of different playable characters, and you can go back and revisit levels as you please, but what you're coming here for is the high-quality gameplay and high-quality presentation across the board. Skyrogue is something wildly unique, and that's saying something in the world of indies. It's a third-person or first-person dogfighting game. You know, you're in an airplane flying around shooting things down, but it adds in elements of roguelike gameplay. So you try to take down as many enemies as you can, and then you have to land at your base, where you can then get upgrades and make your airplane better before going out again. And the whole game has this really cool art style that looks a lot like the Virtua Racing, Virtua Fighter, that type of early polygonal gameplay that we saw from Sega in the mid to late 90s. And Skyrogue is half off for $9.99. Hypercharge Unboxed is one of the newest titles on this list, having just released over the summer of 2020, and is already 30% off for $13.99. Look, when it comes to first-person shooters, there's not a ton of entries out there from independent developers, especially on the Switch. With Hypercharge Unboxed, you basically get to play out your toy soldier dreams, as if you were seeing what would happen if Toy Story was a first-person shooter. There's still an active online community if you want to get online and see how you stack up against the competition, and with continuous support still from the developers, there's new content added every single week. Creature in the Well is another time today that I'm going to say, wow, this is something really different, but I mean, it is. Creature in the Well is a pinball game of sorts, but it plays out as a top-down hack and slash. You'll see in the videos what I mean, but essentially you're running around this big labyrinth trying to find answers to a very ambiguous story, but the way you do so is by whacking balls around and hitting targets or enemies in each room. It's not the longest game, and there are a couple of things I wish they would have done differently, but at 40% off for $8.99, I think Creature in the Well is an awesome, worthwhile title for just about any Switch. Aqua Kitty UDX is a title I picked up from this sale. It's currently 70% off for $2.69, and it's basically Defender, or if you've played on the PlayStation, it's kind of like Resogun. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not as good as the immaculate Resogun, but it is a Defender-like, so it's a side-scrolling shooter where you're swimming around underwater in a boat and trying to ward off enemies while these little non-playable characters are mining resources from the depths of the ocean. It's fun, it's cute, and again, at $2.69, it's not a bad pickup for some quick pick-up-and-play action. And last on the list of games that are just about the action and nothing else is Exception, which is 87% off for $1.99. As you can tell from the trailer on screen right now, no pun intended, or maybe pun is intended, but Exception is an exceptionally cool-looking game. It plays out more like a platformer than anything else, but it's kind of like a Mega Man X on steroids with some weird parallel dimension and world rotating mechanics. I would just say if you like what you see on the screen, you should pick it up, especially when it's 87% off for just $1.99. Moving on to our second category, we've got 10 games that are either based around multiplayer mechanics or stuff that's just fun for the family. And I'll call games out that aren't necessarily family friendly. Unravel 2 you may know by the yarn-based characters, but it's a side-scrolling platformer completely built from the ground up for 2 players to play through together. It has gorgeous graphics. Now, it is published by EA, so it's not technically a Nindie, but it comes from their indie incubation studio, so I think it counts for today's list. Unravel 2 is 75% off for $4.99 and is a great pick, especially if you love games, but there's someone else in your household who isn't as experienced and you wouldn't mind pulling them through the story a little bit. Horizon Chase Turbo is 75% off for $4.99 and is one of my favorite racers, if not definitely my favorite racer on the Switch. It takes the premise of games like Virtua Racing and Daytona USA, the classic arcade-style racers, and builds a huge game out of it where the developers are still actively adding new content. This one's also a great pick for those less experienced gamers because it has an entire rookie mode in it where the races and the levels and everything are designed around people who really don't have a ton of experience holding a controller. At 75% off for $4.99, there is a ton of content here, so if you want some simple, fun arcade racing, you can't go wrong with Horizon Chase Turbo. What the Golf? Is basically, as the developers say, the golf game for people who hate golf. It looks simple enough in the start, but what you quickly find is that this game is just as weird, if not weirder, than something like Untitled Goose Game. Yes, it plays like golf. Your primary mechanic is aiming and then timing your hit, but what ensues afterwards is nothing short of hilarious, and it's really fun for anybody to watch and to pass the controller around. What the Golf is currently 30% off because it is a fairly newer game, just releasing in the late spring, early summer of 2020, but at $13.99, there is a surprising amount of content here that will take you to places you never expected. Castle Crashers Remastered is another title that came from the heyday of Xbox Live Arcade, and the new reincarnation is 40% off for $8.99. This is a great game for just about anyone and supports up to 4 players online or locally, but just know that it is a little gory and it does have like a lot of poop and pee jokes in it and stuff. It's all animated, but I don't know, I still probably wouldn't let my younger kids play it, but older ones I'm fine with it. Either way, Castle Crashers Remastered is a blast. If you played it originally, it's still fun today. It's 40% off for $8.99, and when you look at all of the multiplayer levels, the single-player content, the built-in party games, and the fact that you can replay it over and over and over, either in New Game Plus or by leveling up new characters, Castle Crashers Remastered is a game that's going to get on your Switch, and it's going to be active for a long time. 9 Parchments is a really funny game because it seems like it's always on sale. It's basically a twin-stick magic-style game, kind of like a Diablo, and it's really meant for 4 players at the same time. Even 2 or 3, you're not gonna have as much fun. And that's because so many of the mechanics as you work through the world involve multiple players pointing their wands and shooting magic at the same enemy. People who played through Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles might be familiar with that. 9 Parchments is always on sale, and right now it is still always on sale, 70% off for $5.99. Full Metal Furies is the top-down, side-scrolling, isometric action game by the team who brought us Rogue Legacy. It is one of the more violent games on this list, and it is pretty hard. But just like Castle Crashers, you get multiple characters, multiple types of environments to work your way through, and it's definitely a lot deeper than what you might see from the surface. At 66% off for $6.79, this is one that's going to last you a while as well, but is probably more of a fit if the others in your household are also gamers. Heave Ho is another new party game by the team at Devolver Digital, and as you can see, it kind of falls into that mix of all of the physics-based, zany multiplayer party games, but this one has proved to be one of the best in recent memory. It's currently half off for $4.99 and is definitely a fun, family-friendly pick that everybody in the family can enjoy. Hidden Through Time is 40% off for $4.79, and it is Where's Waldo the video game. Really don't know how else to say that. I mean, it's Where's Waldo. You're looking at it right now. It's Where's Waldo. So, there you go. Tricky Towers is 50% off for $7.49, and it's a really cool take on the Tetris-style falling block gameplay, but you're also building up a physics-driven tower, so not only do you have to balance your own tower as you build it up, but you also have to clear lines so that you can send items over to other players to sabotage their towers. Fast RMX is 50% off for $9.99, and this is the game for anyone who misses Wipeout or F-Zero. The team behind Fast RMX got their start with this title on the Wii U, and the Switch version is the pinnacle of what they were able to squeeze out of it. Just look at what you're seeing on screen. The whole game runs in 60 frames per second and looks gorgeous. There's tons of levels and environments and a little story in there as well. But if you're picking up Fast RMX, you're coming to it because you love this fast-paced style racing. Slowing things down a little bit, we're going to go to 13 titles that are mostly short, but all are story-driven games. These are the titles that are going to be perfect for a long weekend, or if you're just looking for a palate cleanser in between other massive titles. Inside and Limbo are two award-winning, side-scrolling, atmospheric platformers. They have incredible storylines that'll really make you think long after the credits roll, with Limbo, the first release in the series, at 66% off for $3.39, and Inside, the more recent entry, at 66% off for $6.79. Grease is a game that made waves in the video game world a couple of years ago when it originally released with its cool watercolor art style. You play as a girl that basically runs and jumps her way through this big, beautiful world, slowly returning color to a world of black and white and gray. Grease is currently 60% off for $6.79, and I will say that I have picked this one up myself when it was $4.99, so it's not the lowest price ever, and you're only going to get about 5 hours of gameplay out of it, but still, it's about the same price as renting a movie. Thimbleweed Park is a long-awaited entry from the team behind games like The Secret of Monkey Island and all of those other classic LucasArts point-and-click adventure games, and it is currently 60% off for $7.99. The Last Campfire is a much shorter experience and quite a departure from what we saw at the team who made No Man's Sky. The Last Campfire recently released over the summer and contains lots of Zelda-style puzzles, so you're going to want to put your thinking cap on for this story, and you can get this adventure started while it's 30% off for $10.49. Murder by Numbers is a great title that is a perfect fit for anyone who longs to be a detective and loved feeling like an attorney in the Phoenix Wright series, because this game comes from a lot of the people involved in the original Ace Attorney trilogy. Murder by Numbers is very funny, very lighthearted, and is currently 33% off for $10.04. NeoCab is 40% off for $11.99 and is a much shorter experience about a girl who's basically an Uber driver and is trying to get out of, well, I don't want to spoil it, but she's in a tricky situation, and the story is actually one of the more compelling I've seen in this genre. Basically, you're interviewing people that are in your cab, you're trying to find more clues, and ultimately trying to get out from under the, let's just say, predicament you're in. The Framed Collection includes a couple of different titles and is currently 60% off for $3.99. These games are really neat, and they play out like a comic book where you see the whole page of frames at one time, but it's up to you to piece together the order in which all of those frames go together. When you screw it up, you see things play out in hilarious different, well, I don't know if they're supposed to be hilarious, but play out in different ways nonetheless. And the satisfaction you feel of getting it all right, even if you do it on the first try, is always a blast. 1980X is a game that released earlier this year and was loved by many but ultimately panned because of how short it was. Essentially, 1980X is an interactive story where all of the gameplay takes place inside of a 1980s arcade. All of the games you'll play are things you're going to be familiar with if you've ever seen 1980s style arcade games, but they're all very short and you'll only play 1 or 2 levels each before going back to the main story, and the whole thing can be completed in about 2 hours. Now that 1980X is 30% off for $6.99, I think that's a much easier pill to swallow. The Gardens Between is one of the titles on this list that has a story that has really stayed with me, and I've found myself thinking about it from time to time. well after playing it. It's 73% off for $5.49 and involves a brother and sister going through like a time travel experience where they're learning about their memories and reliving them. It's very weird, very obtuse, but very heartwarming with great visuals and an awesome soundtrack, and at 73% off for $5.49 is an easy recommendation for anyone looking for a great story that'll take about 4 hours to finish. For those of you looking for a story that is much larger in scope, we've got 3 titles for you today. The first of which is Knights and Bikes, which is 25% off for $14.99. Now this one is a little bit more crude, but it has a really neat art style that's very comic book / Saturday morning cartoon looking. It's a story about 2 girls that are best friends and just trying to beat the hell out of everything in their path. But unlike many of the other games on this list, this one includes a lot of deep turn-based combat, as well as a bunch of RPG elements to help carry you through an increasingly challenging journey. Next up are 2 games that I will admit I have not played, but I've heard such great things about these games I figured we should include them because they're both at a very high discount right now. AI The Somnium Files is an interactive anime-inspired story that won a bunch of Game of the Year nods last year in 2019 and is currently 60% off for $23.99. And last on the story-driven list is The Talus Principle, 75% off for $7.49. This is a first-person, story-based puzzle game that I, again, have not played, but I know a lot of people who would put The Talus Principle somewhere between Portal and The Stanley Parable. If either of those are right up your alley, then The Talus Principle probably will be as well, and at 75% off for $7.49, it's not a huge risk to take either. Next up, we're heading into role-playing games. Now, I know that we've covered games that include RPG elements, and we're gonna cover more later on, but these are games that are much more traditional. So if you've played Final Fantasy games, or the Tales of games, or even Western role-playing games, these are gonna be right at home for you. The first up is one of my top 3 favorite indies on the Switch, and that is Cosmic Star Heroine, which is 60% off for $5.99. This is a sci-fi RPG with turn-based combat and about a 20-hour story that is one of the best-paced games I've seen this side of Chrono Trigger. If you've listened to Nindie Nation in the past, you've heard me gush about this game. If you like JRPGs, you need to play Cosmic Star Heroine. And Child of Light is another one of those games that I love. Now, again, this is not technically a Nindie because it was published by Ubisoft, but it was also developed by an internal indie incubator that was focused on making smaller in scope titles. Child of Light is more of a side-scrolling RPG, but still has turn-based combat with a really cool timing system, very similar to Final Fantasy X or the Grandia series. Right now, Child of Light is 75% off for $4.99, and while I do love and highly recommend this game, I will also add that this one is on sale at this price quite a bit, so if you're in your last $5 or $7, maybe pick something else because you'll always be able to find Child of Light for this price. The SteamWorld games are going to show up a couple of times in this list, and 2 of them in particular are considered RPGs. The first of which is SteamWorld Heist Ultimate Edition, which is 75% off for $4.99. This is an RPG, even though it may not look like it. It is a turn-based tactical RPG where you and your band of robots are infiltrating other ships trying to clear them out of enemies. You'll get abilities, upgrade abilities, level up your characters, grind if you need to. And the cool thing that this title does is build a whole engine around aiming your shots to bounce off of different walls and pierce through enemies. And it can be really satisfying when you pull off a shot that takes out 3 enemies at once. Again, at 75% off for $4.99, this game will easily give you 15 plus hours of very, very addictive gameplay. The newest title in the SteamWorld series is SteamWorld Quest, which is currently half off for $12.49, and by all intents and purposes, SteamWorld Quest is a traditional JRPG with card battling mechanics and that tried and true SteamWorld humor. If you like robots, if you like cards, if you like JRPGs, or if you just like Monty Python style humor, SteamWorld Quest is a great fit, and $12.49 I think is the perfect price. Golf Story is a bit of a different animal because it is an RPG in the same way that something like Earthbound is, but it includes a lot of mechanics built around, well, golf. I think the easiest way to describe Golf Story is to take a Mario Golf game and then take elements from Super Mario RPG or Earthbound and mash it all together, and you get Golf Story. And right now, Golf Story is half off for $7.49. Hyper Light Drifter is a game that we talk about a lot when it's on sale at Nindie Nation, and right now it's 50% off for $9.99, and is one of the highest rated games on today's list, period, but I think it's pretty divisive. Some people will love the dark sci-fi story and the ambiguous plot where you're really kind of chasing things around and just kind of trying to learn the world yourself. And some people will prefer something with a little bit more direction. If you are the latter, Hyper Light Drifter might not be for you, but if you want to experience an incredible atmospheric story and you like the idea of gameplay that's a little bit of hack and slash, a little bit of dashing and moving quickly through puzzles, then Hyper Light Drifter just might be the game for you. Taking up 3 spots on this list is the Banner Saga trilogy, all of which are on sale right now for great prices. First, a little bit about the series. It's basically taking place in the world of Vikings and magic. It's a grim, melancholy story about a group of Vikings on a quest across the country, and plays out a lot like a Fire Emblem game with permadeath and a lot of turn-based strategy that's going to really have you pausing and sitting and thinking in between each move. The Banner Saga 1 is 80% off for $4.99. The Banner Saga 2 is also 80% off for $4.99. And if you've gotten through both of those and you still haven't played the third, the Banner Saga 3 is 60% off for $9.99. If you're looking for something a bit closer to Diablo, then Torchlight 2 is the game for you. Torchlight 2 is 40% off for $11.99 and is much better than the recently released Torchlight 3. Seriously, don't even bother. Torchlight 2 does play just like a hack and slash Diablo where you can play as ranged characters, melee characters, and everything in between. With a bunch of randomized elements, a huge story, and a couple of expansions that are included in the Switch version, $12 is going to get you a lot of game, and Torchlight 2 does not disappoint. Finally, we've got Under Hero, which is half off for $8.49, and another more recent game on this list. This one plays out as a side-scrolling action RPG, so you're running left to right, exploring big areas and hacking and slashing your way through each level, but while you're doing it, you're unraveling a pretty interesting story and chipping away at experience points to upgrade your character along the way. The next category we're going to discuss today are what I would refer to as the arcade or score-chasing titles. There's 8 of these, and I would consider these games the perfect pick if you're just looking for something to pick up and play for a few minutes, or you just love the gameplay style and you want to keep chipping away at getting the highest score you can. First up is Ollie Ollie Switch Stance, which includes both Ollie Ollie 1 and 2 for 80% off at $2.99. Now that is an awesome deal. This release came out, I think, about a year ago, and is a side-scrolling skateboarding game where you're basically just kind of endless running, and your goal is to combine as many tricks as possible without landing on your face. If you like score chasing and you like those games that are all about the perfect 30-second run, that's exactly what you're going to find with Ollie Ollie Switch Stance. Panzer Dragoon Remake got a bit of a bad rap when it originally released earlier this year, which is fair. It launched with a bunch of technical problems, which have all since been worked out through patches. If you've never played the game before, it is just like the original Panzer Dragoon or Star Fox or Rez. What that means is that your camera is behind your character, you're flying on an on-rails path, and you're shooting down everything in your way. Getting the perfect run is of course the main goal, and right now at 50% off for $12.49, even though the campaign itself is only about an hour long, there is some additional content to play with after the fact, and I don't think anybody goes into this game thinking they're just going to play it once. With a level select and a bunch of other stuff to play with, it's really easy to get in for 5 minutes at a time and still really enjoy yourself. Thumper is described by the developers as a fast-paced, dark rhythm horror game. It's an on-rails rhythm game that plays a lot like the classic Amplitude or other harmonics games, and is 75% off for $4.99. Now, you're going to want to be more into dark industrial music to really enjoy this game, but if you've got a great pair of headphones, you like industrial electronic music, and you're willing to sit down and just really dig in and get the highest scores possible, Thumper is an incredibly satisfying experience when you pull it off. Lumines Remastered is probably my favorite puzzle game on the Switch and is 50% off for $7.49. Again, this is published by Sega, if I remember, but is developed by an entirely indie team, many of which have recently moved over to create the incredible Tetris Effect. Lumines is a falling block puzzle game of sorts, but also built around the beat of the music. There's a ton of great music in there that ranges in all kinds of styles, but, watch a trailer, listen to a soundtrack, and decide for yourself if the music's a fit. If it is, you gotta pick up Lumines Remastered. This game is awesome. Pato Box is an arcade-style game that plays a lot like Punch-Out! If you're looking at the screen right now, you're seeing the black and white version of what basically looks like Super Punch-Out!, where it's a boxing game where you're behind the shoulder and you're doing your best to learn the tells of your opponent to knock him out. What Pato Box does really cool, though, is that there is a big story that's really interesting and pretty funny in between the fights. You'll even be exploring the area where your opponents reside and walking around looking for secret hidden items in between the battles themselves. If you like boxing, especially if you like Punch-Out, or if you're just really good at picking out patterns, Pato Box is a really fun title that's 75% off for $3.74. Demon's Tilt is the best pinball game on the Switch. I don't know if I need to say more, but it's 40% off for $11.99, and it only has one table, but that one table has like 7 different levels to it. Know that given the name, there is a ton of satanic imagery and things like that, so you gotta be okay with that, but assuming you are, and you like pinball, you can't go wrong with Demon's Tilt, which was developed by the team who originally made Aliens Crush and Devil's Crush for the TurboGrafx 16. And last but not least is Exit the Gungeon. Now we'll hear a little bit more from the Gungeon team later on, but Exit the Gungeon is the newest release in this series and features frantic twin-stick gameplay as you work your way to get out of the Gungeon that you've been in for the last, however many years. Exit the Gungeon is a lot of fun. They just had a huge update called Hello to Arms, so there's a lot of new content in there. I thought the game was a great value for $10 earlier this year when it released, and now there's almost twice as much content there, and it's 30% off for $6.99. Next up are the Metroidvanias, or if you want to get away from that term, exploration platformers. Most of these games are going to be built around the premise that you are side-scrolling through a world, reaching areas that you cannot access, having to backtrack, finding new abilities, and then getting through that door to progress. Just in case I needed to explain a Metroidvania. First up is Gato Roboto, which is half off for $3.99. Now this black and white Metroidvania about a cat in a mech suit is awesome, and it's about a 3 to 4 hour game that I loved from start to finish. I have seen the game as low as $3 in the past, so this isn't its lowest price ever, but at $1 per hour, $4 is an awesome price for an awesome game. Dex is a fairly newer entry to the list as it only released about a month ago and is already 60% off for $7.99. If you like cyberpunk stories and you want a bit more narrative in your exploration platformer, Dex is a great fit. We're going to see Shantae a few times today, and the first time we're going to see her is in Shantae and the Seven Sirens, the newest entry from the Shantae series. While many of the more recent Shantae entries feature a level-based structure where you do backtrack, but you do it on a per-level basis, Shantae and the Seven Sirens takes that Saturday morning cartoon art style and the hilarious humor that we've come to know and love, and does so in a much more open-ended world where you're going to be teleporting around and stuff, but you still have to find the abilities that are going to help you get to the next level. Shantae and the Seven Sirens is one of the pricier games on today's list, as it is 30% off for $20.99. Willy Jetman Astro Monkey's Revenge for 54% off at $6.89 is another title I picked up this week for myself. It's a side-scrolling game with a jetpack. I mean, what else do you need to know? It's really fun, the traversal is a blast to play through, and it's a much bigger game than it might let on. If you want something lighthearted and you like the idea of guns and jetpacks, and who doesn't, Willy Jetman Astro Monkey's Revenge for $6.89 is a great way to kick off a long weekend. Coming back to the SteamWorld series, we've got SteamWorld Dig 2, which is always on sale and is again this week 60% off for $7.99. Now, if you've never played SteamWorld Dig, you do not need to play the original. If you really care about the story, you can look it up for yourself, and the original is on sale as well, but I think that SteamWorld Dig 2 is so much better in every single way that at 60% off for $7.99, it is a fantastic Metroidvania with a bunch of digging elements and a huge world to explore that'll last you about 12 hours or so and is a ton of fun from start to finish. Shinseki Into the Depths is another game that I haven't had much time with. I did dabble with it a bit on Apple Arcade, but I haven't played it on the Switch. It's a Metroidvania exploration platformer about being underwater in a little submarine and exploring under the ocean. It's 25% off for $14.99 and has received extensive acclaim since its release earlier this year. Never Song is probably the shortest game on this list besides Gato Roboto, as it's also about 3 to 4 hours long, but as you can see, it has a really cool art style with all of the yellows and blacks that kind of mix together, and that's because you're playing through the dreams of a boy that's in a coma and trying to wake up. The story's pretty somber and it tackles a couple of more mature themes, but the gameplay is very similar to Hollow Knight or other games like that, and at 35% off, $9.74 is a bit high for something that's only going to last you about 4 hours, but if you've had this one in your sights for a while, now is the time to pick up Never Song. And finally, Mabel and the Wood is 75% off for $3.74 and is all about a girl working her way through a scary forest with a sword that's too heavy for her to pick up. It's a very empowering game, as there's some Mega Man style elements to it. You defeat big bosses and then you get abilities like turning into a spider and things like that. It's definitely a game that really makes you enjoy the exploration and traversal of this type of genre. And at $3.74, if you like what you see from the art style on screen, definitely consider Mabel in the Wood for $3.74. Next up, we've got good old platformers. Whether they're 2D or 3D, these 12 games are all about running and jumping and getting to the end of a level, and I love them. Shovel Knight Treasure Trove is your mandated, required purchase if you do not own it yet. This is some of the best platforming you will find and one of the best indie games of all time. Plus, the Treasure Trove is half off for $19.99 and includes the entirety of the Shovel Knight saga across 5 games. You get the original Shovel Knight Shovel of Hope, the Plague of Shadows built around Plague Knight, the King of Cards built around King Knight, and Spectre of Torment, my favorite, built around Spectre Knight. All 4 of those games are entirely original campaigns with different levels, different characters, different abilities, different stories, and even different soundtracks. And by the way, all of those soundtracks are amazing. In addition, you get Shovel Knight Showdown, which is the best Smash Bros. Game that's not Smash Bros. And there's been a lot of wannabes out there, and Shovel Knight Showdown is awesome. If you don't own the Shovel Knight Treasure Trove, pick it up now while it's 50% off for $19.99. Speaking of collections, the Trine Ultimate Collection is 70% off for $15. This series is a bit different as it goes from side-scrolling to 3D in between the second and third versions, but goes back to 2D for the fourth. They're much more puzzle-oriented platformers because you've got multiple characters that you have to switch between in order to get through the levels. Whether it's platforming or combat challenges, everybody has a different ability and they're all kind of moving together through the levels. Sorry about that, I knocked over my water bottle because I'm having to take a lot of drinks of water while talking through 90-something games. The Trine series of games are very highly regarded, but they seem seem to fly under the radar a lot. I think a lot of us have received many of those games for free through Game Pass or PlayStation Plus or whatever service is giving them out for free that week, so you may already have some of these, but if you want to pick them all up at one time, the Ultimate Collection, 70% off for $15. Gotta admit, that's a pretty good deal for 4 high-quality games. Sonic Mania, I don't care what anybody says, is absolutely an indie game, even though it was published by Sega and is a longtime Sega mascot. It was developed by Christian Whitehead and a very small team of people who were confident they could make a better Sonic game than Sega could. And they were right. Right now, Sonic Mania is 50% off for $9.99, and it is, without a doubt, the best Sonic game there is. I told you we'd see Shantae again, and now we've got a couple of games from her, the first of which is Shantae and the Pirate's Curse. Now, this is one of the older games before they went to that beautiful Saturday morning cartoon art style, so I would recommend going to this one if you've played some of the newer releases, whether it's the Half Genie Hero or Seven Sirens, because it's every bit as good as those other games, but with a little bit more of a level-based structure and pixelated graphics. Shantae and the Pirate's Curse is half off for $9.99, but if you haven't played it yet, my number one recommendation if you've ever been interested in the Shantae series is Half Genie Hero, and the Ultimate Edition, which includes a bunch of DLC, is 40% off for $17.99. These are side-scrolling platformers with a bunch of action, a ton of characters, and some of the best-looking visuals I've ever seen in a video game. There's a ton of content here. There's a bunch of different modes too. There's a very easy mode and a very hard mode, as well as DLC that lets you play through the entire campaign in like 4 different ways. There's a lot here for $18. Flipping Death is a really cute, funny little game with actually a similar art style to the Shantae games, but all about death and the afterlife. If you're in for some dark comedy, Flipping Death is 80% off for $3.99. Witch Eye is a platformer that does something really different because you are, as the name implies, a witch's eye, and the control scheme is really interesting. If you're playing in handheld mode, there's a lot of mixing up the analog sticks, the buttons, and the touchscreen to make something really unique that works really well. Witch Eye isn't one of the best games on the Switch by any means, but it's very unique and currently is half off for $2.49, so I think if you like what you see, it's one that's worth taking a chance on. The team at 13 AM, who originally came to fame with Runbow, built their own version of a side-scrolling platformer with Double Cross. And Double Cross is another beautiful game that plays like a dream and has tons of really cool traversal elements in a really fun world. It does get a bit long in the tooth at the end, and there's a little bit of redundancy that doesn't need to be there, but for the most part, what is there is a blast, and at 75% off for $4.99, even if you don't make it to the end, I still think you'll feel like it was a worthwhile purchase. Firework is the epitome of a cheap small Nindie that plays out a lot like a Mega Man game, but with very primitive pixelated visuals. The game is a bit janky, but what's there is really fun. It's almost as if Mega Man X was originally created for the NES because it's got the wall jumping and dashing mechanics and some of the stuff that wasn't added in those original first couple of Mega Man games. Either way, there's a lot to like here. I had a lot of fun with it, and Firework is 87% off for just $1.99. But if you're wanting something a bit closer to Mega Man X, you can't go wrong with Metaloid Origin. Metaloid Origin is 50% off for $3.49, and I'd really like to tell you a lot more about the game, but just look at the screen right now. I mean, it's a Mega Man X game, and it's pretty good. Spinch is one of my favorite side-scrolling platformers on the Switch, and one that I made a Let's Play of if you want to go watch it on our YouTube channel. It's hilarious, it's really cracked out, and has some awesome artwork and a really good soundtrack. If you're into the kind of platformers where you gotta really perfect your 10-second at a time run in between checkpoints, you'll love Spinch. There's running, jumping, wall jumping, and a couple of little abilities you get, but for the most part, it's all about moving fast and not dying, and every second I played that game was a blast. Spinch is a pretty new game too, and right now it's 20% off for $11.99. Last but not least for this category is one of my favorite games of the year for the Switch. Panzer Paladin is a title I reviewed for the Nintendo Village, and I think there's a Let's Play on our own YouTube channel as well. Panzer Paladin is a side-scrolling platformer with gorgeous pixel art that mixes in elements of Castlevania, Metal Storm, and Mega Man to make something that really hits that perfect formula in a way that I haven't seen since Shovel Knight. And I mean that seriously. This game can stand toe-to-toe with the level of quality and polish we see from Shovel Knight. It's also no slouch in terms of content, as the main campaign will take you about 13 hours or so to complete. Again, it's a fairly new game, but I still think it's one of the best of the year on the Switch, and Panzer Paladin is currently 20% off for $15.99. And we're nearing the home stretch, friends and citizens, and let me tell you, I've been talking about a lot of games and I can't wait. So we're gonna do a little bit of brain-teasing, problem-solving, puzzle-type games, and then we're gonna get into my favorite category as the last one of the day. If you're a fan of Nindie Nation, you know exactly what I'm talking about. First up are 9 games that are all about making you work your brain, and it starts with Superliminal. This is a fairly new game that released over the summer and is basically a living world of MC Escher perspective-shifting puzzle solving. You look at a room and then you move around it and watch as the perspective actually changes the size and shape and scale of things in the room, and you use that to solve your puzzles. And again, Superliminal was a fairly new game that was very well received, and it's already 30% off for $13.99. If you played Theme Hospital back in the 90s, you will be happy to know that the 2 original developers of that game are working together to make a theme park for the new generation of consoles, and it's called 2 Point Hospital. It's 50% off for $19.99 and brings with it all of the lighthearted humor and hilarity that you know and love from the original, all in a world where you own and operate your very own hospital. Terraria is probably one of the highest rated games that we'll talk about today, and is finally coming to the end of nearly a decade of adding new content. The easiest way to describe Terraria is it's basically like Minecraft or playing with Legos, but in a 2D side-scrolling plane. If you want an infinite amount of gameplay, or if you're a fan of games like Stardew Valley where you can just kind of get in and do whatever you want, you can choose to explore or build or battle or just about anything in between, and you're never going to run out of content. A game with unlimited content seems like it would be expensive, but no, Terraria is currently 50% off for $14.99. If you're in the mood for some turn-based strategy that's going to give you a bit of tower defense that's really going to give your brain a workout, Bad North looks and plays like a tower defense game set in the world of Vikings with a visual style that looks like a tabletop game. And you can check it out 50% off for $7.49. You may know this next game just because you've heard people say, "Super hot." And Superhot is indeed a blast. It's a first-person shooter kind of melee thing where time only moves as you do. If you're seeing the footage right now, you've probably seen this game before, and just know it's a perfect fit for the Switch if you're not able to play it in VR. Superhot is currently 40% off for $14.99. The Tourist is one of my favorite games that employs the voxel art style. That's when you see big blocky pixels that still manage to look beautiful, and it's used to an excellent extent in The Tourist alongside a really cute, calming story and a lot of fun puzzle solving at 30% off for $13.99. If you like games that are really gonna put some pressure on and really make you think outside of the box, Don't Starve is a great fit. Basically, you are stranded on an island and you have to survive, so that includes gathering materials, surviving the night, building up shelter, and then warding off enemies that come to try to take it all away from you. The Switch version includes a bunch of extra DLC and Don't Starve Together, the 2-player game that is so different it really should be sold as a separate game. Don't Starve with all of the additions and Don't Starve Together is currently only $4.99, which is 75% off. If you wish that SimCity had a modernized version that was on the Switch and you like the idea of managing a city, building skyscrapers, and then summoning tornadoes to destroy it all, Cities Skyline is currently 75% off for $9.99 and will let you live out all of your wildest, darkest, weirdest god complexes. And then last on this list is my favorite tower defense game, and really the franchise that kind of introduced me to it as a whole. Pixel Junk Monsters 2 is the sequel to the award-winning tower defense game that really made the genre explode in the mainstream. While the original was locked to the PlayStation for a long time, the sequel brings with it new gameplay styles, a gorgeous new art style, and more content than you could ever manage to work your way through, as well as an infinite mode that is just a ton of fun. Pixel Junk Monsters 2 is a fairly recent release on the Switch too, and with all of this content, it's hard to believe that it's currently 80% off for $2.99. And finally, rounding out this massive list of 90-something indies for the Switch that are currently on sale at some of their best prices ever, are all of the games that we call Nindie Trifectas. Now, what does that mean? Well, these games could be different genres. They could be a hack and slash, they could be a card game, they could be a platformer, they could be a first-person dungeon crawler, really anything. But all of these games have three things in common. They include procedurally generated levels, roguelike mechanics, and RPG elements. Feels good. So yeah, all of these games really are almost infinite in gameplay style, and as long as you like what you see and you like this style of gameplay, all of these games come highly, highly recommended from Nindie Nation. First up is the game that's probably going to be Game of the Year, and that's Hades, which is 20% off for $19.99. Look, do I need to tell you what Hades is? You got Greek mythology, you've got an awesome narrative, addictive gameplay, and the fourth game by Supergiant Games. These guys made Bastion, they made Transistor, they made Pyre, which isn't on the Switch yet, and now they've made their magnum opus Hades, and it's every bit as good as you've heard. If you don't have Hades yet, pick it up now while it's only $20. Slay the Spire is really similar to Hades, but last year's model. It's much more of a fantasy theme, and it's all a card-based battler, so you gotta like that deck-building mechanic, but if you do, Slay the Spire is currently 40% off for $14.99. Something a bit different is Moonlighter. Now, Moonlighter looks at first like a Zelda-style hack-and-slash RPG, and it is. You spend half of your time diving down into dungeons, exploring, getting further every time, trying to escape before you die, and looting as much as possible. The other half of the game, however, you spend running the shop in town that sells wares for all of the other people that are trying to go down into the dungeons. You gotta admit, there's nothing else like it, and everything Moonlighter does, it does with incredible execution. Right now, Moonlighter is at its lowest price ever at 66% off for $8.49. Enter the Gungeon might be one of the best known games on today's list, and it's currently 50% off for $7.49, which is a fairly common occurrence for this game. But if you haven't played Enter the Gungeon, it's one of the tougher twin-stick shooter variants of the Nindie Trifecta, but one that just about every fan of the genre should give a shot at one point or another. Similarly, Rogue Legacy did a very similar thing for the side-scrolling platform roguelike just a few years ago. It only came to the Switch about a year or so ago, but everything it does, it still does with incredible execution. There's an infinite amount of side-scrolling castles to work your way through, a ton of different biomes, and every time you play as a different randomized character with perks and traits that can do anything from have you be super strong and slow, to enable to see color, to sometimes just walking around and farting, which does absolutely nothing, but it's hilarious. In fact, the whole game is hilarious, and the gameplay is a blast. We've got a sequel coming, but Rogue Legacy 2 just recently entered early access on PC, so it's gonna be a while. If you're interested in Rogue Legacy, the original one is currently 66% off for $5.09. Of all of the Nindie Trifectas in the top-down twin-stick shooter category, Ruiner is one of the more polished in this genre. It tells a dark cyberpunk story about a guy that, surprise, surprise, wakes up and doesn't know who he is, but knows that he did a lot of bad things and he's got to work out the story and kill everybody that wronged him. You know, that old chestnut. Even with a fairly common story, Ruiner is a ton of fun and a game that I think got overlooked earlier this year. So right now, you can pick it up and right that wrong while it's half off for $9.99. Hyper Parasite is a very new entry in this list and is already 80% off for $3.59. I've spent a good deal of time with this game so far, and what it does really uniquely is that you play not as a character, but as a parasite, and you work your way around the levels, infecting and becoming all of the characters you see. So you can infect a police officer, and then you have their abilities, you can infect a gang member and take over their abilities, and so on and so forth. The game does have a good deal of jank in it, but that's kind of to be seen in all of these randomly generated games, and what Hyper Parasite brings to the formula is unique and really fun to play around with. At 80% off for $3.59, it's not a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a lot of fun and I think is very much worthwhile for that price. The Swords of Ditto is an entry in this list that I slept on for a long time, but I'm really glad I finally picked it up. It essentially plays out just like the traditional old Zelda games do, like Link Between Worlds, Link to the Past, that type of top-down action RPG gameplay, but it has one of the coolest stories in any indie I've played in quite a long time. Telling you more would really ruin it, but the way that this game rolls out its story and the way it opens up after you finish your first run of getting to the final boss is incredible. The Swords of Ditto has a bit of a slower start and it's a little harder than I think it should be in the first hour or two, but if you stick with it, I promise you're gonna love the way it pans out. And it's all the easier to do so while Swords of Ditto is 50% off for $7.49. If you play a lot of Nindie Trifectas and you want something with a challenge, or if you're coming to this genre for the first time and you love cover-based shooters, West of Dead is the game for you. Watching the video, you can see this game's art style is really unique. It's very dark with lots of cell shading and really cool smoke effects, which I feel is something people haven't said since Call of Duty 2, but maybe that's just me. West of Dead plays out like a Westerner, so you're running around with 6 shooters and things like that, but in West of Dead, you are indeed dead in purgatory and using that whole Western revenge plot to pull you along. The gameplay is much slower, much more methodical, and heavily leans into cover-based shooting, so you're going to want to like that. If you do, West of Dead is a fairly new game that didn't get enough praise when it released, and it's 30% off for $13.99. And the last game on today's list is Minute, the black and white Zelda-like RPG that takes place 60 seconds at a time. You may hear that and think, I really don't want to play a different game every 60 seconds, and I promise you it plays out differently than you think, but to tell you more would be spoiling it. If you like the idea of a really different take on a Zelda-style game, check out Minute while it's 50% off for $4.99. Whew! And that's it for today. Thank you for stopping by and checking out these 90-something indies with me. Let me know what you're picking up in the YouTube comments below and keep the conversation going by reaching out to me on Twitter at Nindie Nation. If you like what you saw today and you're not subscribed, please do. Every Tuesday, we have a brand new weekly show that goes through every single indie releasing on the Switch that week, as well as the best indie deals currently available. Please don't forget to like and subscribe on your way out, and thank you so much for stopping by. Your support means the world to us, and I hope we see you again next week for a brand new episode of Nindie Nation. We're almost at episode 100. Until then, friends and citizens, thank you again so much. I'm Jeff. This has been the Nindie Nation Black Friday special, and remember, no matter what kind of game you're looking for, a puzzle, a family game, a multiplayer game, a side-scrolling platformer, a 3D platformer, a shooter, a racer, a Nindie Trifecta, and anything in between, know that Nindie Nation will be right here to help you find just the thing to keep your Joy-Cons synced.